record. Okay. Hopefully that works. Okay, let's start. Hello, everybody. My name is Andy Hong. I'm an assistant professor at City of Metropolitan Planning at the University of Utah. I'm here with all the students from our transportation workshop. We worked very hard on this topic of the speed limit changes, the impact of speed limit changes and pedestrian traffic safety. So the students formed a mighty team to investigate this issue, particularly because, as some of you know, there has been a ordinance change 2 years ago in Salt Lake City to lower the speed limit to 20 miles per hour for the residential streets. So students and I were interested in investigating whether that speed limit change had any effect on the pedestrian traffic safety. So the students tackle this in two different ways. One is to look at the data quantitatively, and they did a lot of the descriptive statistics and the modeling to compare changes before and after. And they did some fantastic mapping as well. For the qualitative side, they did an interview, they did a survey. So to understand the policy changes, not just at the quantitative side, but also the qualitatively looking at people's perception and et cetera. So here I'm very excited to present our students' presentation. So just so you know, this is still work in progress. Students are still wrapping up their projects. So some of the results are not finalized, but hopefully you have a lot of insights from this presentation. All right, let's start with Colby. All right.
All right. Good morning. My name is Colby, and I will be giving the introduction, background, and research goals. I'll just go over a primer just to set the stage, starting with pedestrian crashes. All right, so where are we as a nation? Since 2010, the death rate against pedestrians in car-related accidents has increased since 2010. It is worth noting that the main populations seeing an increase in fatality rates are populations in the cohorts of 20 to 44, 45 to 69, and 70% older. Since 2010, the 7,522 pedestrian deaths in 2022 compared to 4,302 in 2010. 16% of the crashes are involved at speeds higher than 35 or less than 35 miles per hour, and then 23% occurred at intersections. All right, but what about Utah? So this year, the National Highway Safety Administration found that we are ranked 4th in the nation for pedestrian crashes at intersections. And compared to the national average, we are at 1.33 people per 100,000 people versus the US's 2.26. Of the fatal crashes in Utah from 2018 to 2022, 25% of the crashes were related to hit and runs. 37% occurred at intersections, 48% involved alcohol, and 70% of the crashes involved males. So knowing this, what are our options? All right. So starting with this, the 20 is plenty policy. So its origins and beginnings in the UK, where Rod King founded a grass movements campaign in the UK called 20 is plenty for us. The campaign started a landslide effect in all of UK. So Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England all pushed for a unified 20 miles per hour speed limit. Or 30 kilometers per hour. The idea was inspired by Hilden's cycling trip to Germany, where he observed that the unified speed limit for the entire town, which was set at 30 kilometers per hour, or roughly 18 miles per hour, caused safer streets with more pedestrians and cyclists, higher air quality, and less cars on the road overall. Since then, after the precedent set by the UK, there has been a growing interest in the 20 is plenty as a practical transportation policy used internationally. All right, so that brings us to Salt Lake's 20 mile per hour speed limit policy. From a unanimous vote in May 2022, all 25 mile per hour speed limits were reduced to 20 miles per hour. It reduced up to 70% of the SLC roads, and the city has labeled it as a first step. All right, and with that, I'll bring it to the research goals. We're going to examine the effects of the 20 is plenty policy on the number of crashes and resident perception of roadway safety in Salt Lake City. So what is the relationship between a decrease in speed limit and the number of crashes? gather public opinions on the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit reduction, focusing on perceptions of safety, behavior changes, and potential alternative strategies, and understand individual experiences and insights through interviews to enrich the survey findings. With that, I will bring it over to the literature review team.
So preliminary research found that there is no shortage of research on this topic. Given that we are studying the effectiveness of the 20s legislation, we decided to focus on speed limit reduction on local roads in North American cities. So we excluded international cities, excluded rural roads, and highways and interstates. Here we found some key methodology differences that were important for our literature review. So every research paper that we found looked at a time frame before and after. However, the time frame they looked at was different. Some looked at 2 years, some looked at 1 year, and some took out and made a different time period for COVID-19. Dependent variables were speed and crashes, depending on the research. And some key control variables we found were weather, time of day, pedestrian bike involvement, and severity. There's 2 different methods for control groups. Some chose to use adjacent roads that were not affected by speed limit change, while others decided to use nearby cities that were not affected by speed limit change. For limitations, none of the research we found included neighborhood demographics, and we thought that was an oversight that we wanted to change. In every research we found, there was issues with incomplete data. A lot of the crash data comes from police reports, which can underreport crashes if the police were not involved. And then, given that this is in a laboratory setting, control groups could be tricky to identify. So what results did we find? In general, speed limit reductions led to a decrease in crashes and travel speeds, but there are some caveats. The magnitude of the reduction varied by city. In some places like Seattle, they found little to no change in crashes that resulted in injuries, where places like New York City found as much as a 67% change in injury-related crashes that led to injuries. They also found that there were larger crash reduction on narrow roads, and downtowns saw a larger effect than suburban areas. All of these kind of lead to some sort of implication that roadway geometry and traffic calming could be an important step in crash and speed reduction. So takeaways we had, we want to make sure we expand the time period to maximize data points. So to do that, we expanded to about 2 years. Focus on crashes over change in speeds, given the data we have available to us. Importance of defining a control group. Given that we are not in a laboratory setting, we really need to make sure we find a control group that is as close as possible to the conditions in Salt Lake City. And then, like I mentioned before, the inclusion of demographic data to make sure that to see if there's any unfairness in the way this policy was implemented.
For the qualitative study, we wanted to explore methods used for qualitative studies regarding the speed limit reduction and identify factors that may influence public opinion and travel behavior. We reviewed a mix of both qualitative and quantitative studies in Germany, Sweden, the UK, as well as the United States. We were particularly interested in matters relating to education and engagement, enforcement, and traffic engineering. The perceptions of traffic speed interventions were complex. Participants regarded these the interventions as kind of complex. Some supported them, however, they did not necessarily abide by them. Some did not support them, however, they wanted to abide by traffic laws. Many felt that these interventions were a perceived threats to travel ability and would prolong travel times. These the qualitative studies also found that there is a relationship between certain demographic groups, particularly young men, and sensation-seeking behavior. For takeaways, in order to gain public credibility, it was advised or found that building an evidence base would positively influence public credibility, as well as the role of descriptive norms. That if some individuals abided by traffic reductions, it would influence the collective travelers. Lastly, it was found that perception shifted over time, and that people generally accepted the speed limit reduction.
Okay, so for methods, as quantitative group, we use Salt Lake City as our study area, and the unit of analysis were hexagons. For data, we use crash rates with new metric, and we use crash rates in 5 different severities. For control group, we use socioeconomic values, and with census website, we use population, median household income, gender, age, race, and how people commute. And then for, we use Utah roads from UGRC, and we get the percentage of roads with a speed limit change among all local roads. And then with methods, we first started with t-test and descriptive analysis to see, to compare before and after, to compare the mean of before and after to see if the differences are significant or not. And then we went to OLS regression for Salt Lake City. We got the relationship between a speed limit and crash rates in 5 different severities. So for OLS model, we first get a spatial data. We use Salt Lake City boundary from Salt Lake City, and then we created Salt Lake City hexagons. For independent variable, we input Utah roads from UGRC. We use a special join to join it to hexagons, and we get the proportion of each road within each hexagon. And finally, for our independent variable, we had the share of roads with a speed limit change compared to all local roads. And then we have control variables. We did the same, get the proportion, and we have the share of all control variables within each hexagon. And then for dependent variable, we have crash rates from new metric when we have it in different severities, in 5 different severities. For each of these severities, we have crash counts before and after August 2022. We join it to hexagons, and then we count the number of crash rates in every hexagon for before and after. And then our dependent variable is delta, which is difference between after and before crashes for each hexagon for different severities. So finally, for OLS regression, we had 5 different regressions for different severities. And then we added the control group, and for that we used Sandy. The method we use is PSM model, and we use the methods of nearest and logistic regression. And from that, we figured out, we extracted 393 hexagons in Sandy, which matches with Salt Lake City. So incorporating the Sandy with in our model, we have difference in differences with Salt Lake City and Sandy, and we use Poisson regression for that. So dependent variable is the same, is the crash rate in different severities, but for independent variable, we have binary data for time and treatment. So for time, we assigned 0 for everything before August 2022, and 1 for any variable for after that. And for treatment, we have 1 for Salt Lake City, and then 0 for Sandy.
So the qualitative group employed two separate methods for data collection, one being surveys and the other being interviews. The objective of the survey was to gather a wide range of public opinions on the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit reduction, specifically focusing on perceptions of safety, behavior changes, and potential alternative strategies. The survey employed both close-ended and open-ended questions to balance out quantitative and qualitative data. We had some demographic questions, including what is your age, questions such as that. We had questions focusing on the perception and perception as well as policy questions, such as how safe do you feel on a scale from 1 to 10 in your main mode of transportation, or what do you think is appropriate mile per hour on neighborhood roads? Some alternative strategies we used, we asked questions that were open-ended that allowed participants to consider some broader safety strategies, such as, do you think that this policy change is an effective strategy for safety? Why and why not? We distributed this survey through Google Forms. So we presented this project at the East Liberty Park Community Council, as well as the Central 9th Community Council. And then we sent the survey to several other community councils to distribute with our QR code. So far, 94 responses have been analyzed, and we had a goal of 100 responses, and we're hoping to reach that by the time this project wraps up. And then this data was visualized using charts that Google was able to provide for us, and the open-ended responses were thematically analyzed, focusing on topics such as safety and traffic behavior. And so for the interviews allowed us to explore a little bit more detailed individual experiences and perceptions at a much greater depth, providing some insights that really complemented our survey findings. So we identified 22 intersections in the neighborhood or in neighborhoods in Salt Lake City that had incidences of traffic-related crashes and fatalities. So these were intercept interviews, and they were conducted just at various intersections where there had been these crashes. And our participants represented various transportation modes. Some of them were walkers, some of them were bikers, and some of them were people who used public transit as well as personal vehicle. We used 6 questions. The questions were, what is your main mode of transportation? What is your opinion on lowering speed as a safety measure? Is it effective? How safe do you feel on a scale from 1 to 10 in your main mode of transportation? In your opinion, what do you think is the most appropriate mile per hour on neighborhood roads? Why? Have you noticed any differences in driver behavior since 2022? Do you believe that there are strategies that would be more efficient than speed change? And so these questions allowed us to explore themes like safety perception, driver behavior, and support for alternative strategies. And then we thematically categorized these into the 3 categories, which were safety, driver behavior, and traffic calming measures. We also used the 3E traffic safety framework, being education, enforcement, and engineering, to help us analyze our responses.
All right, let's look at some results. So beginning with the descriptive analysis. So here's our hexagon map of Salt Lake City. I'm going to quickly go through our description. Sorry, Salt Lake City on the left, Sandy on the right. First, I'm just going to go through the distribution of like the different variables that we looked at. So population first, we can see the clustering in like the downtown area. Sandy's pattern's like a little bit more unique. Median household income, percent drive to work. This was kind of an interesting analysis. Like the results from Salt Lake were largely what we expected, with those living in the downtown area and in more walkable, bikeable neighborhoods, driving to work less. But in Sandy, those results were along like the East Bench area, perhaps due to like the age of the residents in that zone, but was a rather interesting finding. So now we're going to go into the before policy implementation and after looking at the number of crashes, and this is grouped by severity in our hexagons for Salt Lake City. So beginning with our fatal crashes, as you can see, our sample size is quite small for these. So, one additional crash in an area can make a big difference. But you can definitely see there are some patterns that emerge here. This is probably the most distinct pattern change of all the severity categories, but there was a big reduction in crashes kind of along the State Street corridor, like south of downtown in the ballpark area. Also less crashes in downtown generally. Moving on to serious injury. This pattern is a little bit more sporadic, also pretty small sample size with these crashes. Generally, we observed there to be more like distinct clustering of crashes in the core downtown area after the intervention, whereas before it was a little bit more sporadic, centered around some of the major intersections, primarily to the west of downtown. But like I said, sample size is very small with this. Now going into the minor injuries, luckily we had a bigger sample size here. And apologies that the scales don't perfectly line up here. That's something we're still working on. You can see that there is a very distinct cluster in the downtown area, and this also zooms in on the core part of Salt Lake City. After the intervention, whereas before, there were a lot more crashes also in that like ballpark area. So definitely we thought it was interesting how for a number of these categories, there was a pretty distinct change in the number of pretty distinct decrease in the number of crashes in that ballpark zone. But overall, not a huge difference in pattern here. And then no injury. This is a very small sample size, but we can see after the intervention, it's more clustered around certain corridors, whereas, after around certain corridors, and then before it's a little bit more sporadic. And then possible injury, not a huge difference here, with the exception of there seems to be kind of like a northward movement of the crashes after the intervention. Okay, and so real quickly, this is a summary table of our regression results. And so beginning with the OLS regression, we ran 10 different regressions here, beginning with one was just for speed limit change, and then with each successive regression, we added an additional variable. And then we ran 10, so the 10th one added all of our additional variables. And then so here, just kind of summarizing by severity index again, for fatal, there wasn't really a strong relationship. You can see there was no statistical significance, and it fluctuated between positive and negative. Serious injury was negative across all models, suggesting that perhaps there's a decrease. However, once again, not statistically significant with that p-value under 0.005. Possible injury, we had another like fluctuation between positive and negative across all models. So also hard to discern much from that. And then going into minor injury, this one was rather interesting because we did have a positive relationship indicating a increase in crashes of that category after the intervention. And some of these results were significant, especially with the earlier models that introduced less variables. However, as they got more complex, we saw less significant results. And then with no injury, negative in most models, and also not significant. And then to the Poisson regression, this one, slightly different results from the OLS. We had starting as positive for the first run, but then becoming negative in successive runs for the fatal crashes. However, most of these results were once again not significant. For the serious injury, this was rather odd that we only saw significant results in earlier models. Later, we saw no significance. And then once again, we had a positive relationship, but the effect is not robust when other factors are considered as we start to add more variables. That tends to be like a trend with a lot of these results. And then possible injury, positive again. So a little bit different with the Poisson versus the OLS, a lot more positive relationships. However, only significant with the first regression. And then minor injury, again, minor injury across both, largely due to the much greater sample size, we had more significant results. And this was also a positive relationship. And then no injury, positive for the first run, and then less so for later runs. All right, moving on to the survey results.
Okay, so we analyzed survey interview results separately. Just as an overview of the data, responses were predominantly white, non-Hispanic, female, and over the age of 65, so they were a little bit skewed. And they resided in Glendale as the main source of transportation was reported as driving. This isn't representative of Salt Lake City's population, so this result is just a little bit skewed. The map on the right represents the neighborhood representation of surveys. And then there was a general sense of low safety overall, even after speed reduction. As for pedestrians, 43.7% of respondents reported feeling the lack of safety, and 13.2% of pedestrians said that they felt safe. And it's not surprising that drivers reported a high perception of safety. Perceptions of speed have largely stayed the same since the policy change, and respondents claim that driver behavior remains as a large barrier to safety. And 20 miles per hour was perceived as the top choice of residential speed at 47.8% compared to other choices. Also, enforcement was noted by many as a requirement for speed reduction success, and over half of respondents voted in support of a speed limit reduction. Respondent recommendations from the survey results were in line with the literature review findings of the 3 E's, such as driver safety campaigns, speed enforcement, and traffic calming measures. And then here's another overview here's a look back at that map for our intersections for the interviews. Based on survey responses, there was a minimal public awareness on the speed policy change that happened in 2022. As for safety perceptions, each mode of transportation's perceived level of safety is on the right, with drivers feeling the safest and bikers feeling the most unsafe. We conducted a word frequency analysis and found high mentions of safety concerns about driver behavior being the same or worse since the policy change, common opinions to lower the speeds even further, and the suggestion of alternative strategies to speed change with high mentions of traffic calming and bike lanes, protected bike lanes specifically. There were high levels of unsafety from interviewees who were pedestrians and cyclists who reported safety levels from 2 to 4 out of 10. And here are some of the direct quotes from them. It's worth mentioning that a transit user had comparably high levels of perceived safety, except in the first and last mile of their trips. Another reported that she witnessed an elderly couple almost get hit at the intersection very recently. Here are some more direct quotes about speed limits. Someone mentioned that speed change isn't a complete solution to safety measures. Another interviewee even expressed her support for the speed limit reduction and that they had lost a friend in recent years due to a car crash. And then here are some direct quotes about driver behavior remaining unchanged or worse, from examples about drivers yelling at pedestrians. So policy changes do not automatically translate into safer outcomes, and the interview recommendations were in line with the survey recommendations, referring back to the 3 E's: education, enforcement, and engineering, requesting things like campaigns, signage, pedestrian design neighborhoods, bike lanes, and traffic calming. for key takeaways and next steps. Will's gonna take it away.
All right. For the descriptive analysis, um, um, okay. So we didn't find really that the corridors that had changed had really resulted in that much change in terms of crashes. The following are sort of descriptions of clusters that in terms of different types of things that change, for example, like fatal crashes before the policy changed, more distinct in clusters, but after more dispersed. But other than that, we didn't find that the policy change really had a very clear relationship with local roads. Okay. As for the regression analysis, we found that their results vary depending on several things, but that generally for the OLS analysis, the serious injury category was really the only one that seemed to be reduced due to the policy change. And the others, there was not categorically enough to define it as a big enough change. The sample size, the small nature of the sample size, the result might be different than, or there might be shortcomings in the result. For the Poisson regression, again, the results going to vary depending on the crash severity level. However, most of the types of crashes actually increased after the policy change, unlike the OLS, which is the only really statistically significant change was negative for the serious injury category. And once again, the sample size was kind of small there. For the survey, for the qualitative part, we discovered that the speed limit reduction is generally supported and generally considered effective. Let's see, there's some disagree, but that for improving road safety, people generally believe that the most effective was traffic calming, followed by enforcement. But traffic calming was the most significant, by far the most significant in terms of what people thought was most effective. Okay, for the survey or for the interviews, really, that we conducted, for the safety level, the drivers felt safe. Public transit users also felt safe. They felt slightly less safe than the drivers in terms of where we asked them to rank. And then pedestrians and bicyclists didn't feel nearly as safe as the other two. For the policy concerns, in the interviews and surveys, people recognized that there were other things that needed to happen besides just simple speed limit reduction. But a lot of them believed that a speed limit reduction would be somewhat effective and that a lot of people encouraged the speed limit reduction, but they did realize that it was not a be all end all. In terms of the policy change, a lot of people didn't know about the policy change. First of all, the second is that people have not really perceived differences in driving. Some people have perceived a lack of improvement, but a decrease in the quality even.
but in general, in terms of part of the purpose of if part of the purpose of the program is to educate people on driver safety and road safety and how the makeup of the road can do that, a lot of the people remain completely unaware of the changes and don't see much of the changes. Some of the changes, there's a difference between perceived change and actual change, but the fact that people don't even really perceive much positive changes, or even that there was a policy at all, suggests that there needs to be work done on education or outreach in terms of traffic safety. Finally, for the next steps is to just finish up the report, to get more surveys in. We're close to the milestone of 100, to explore our models further and to sort of add data that we feel is missing. But kind of bundle that all up and make sure that the final report works. We would like to thank the following organizations or cities: Salt Lake City, the Wasatch Front Regional Council, the Utah Department of Transportation, the Central Ninth Community Council, the East Liberty Park Community Organization, and the Glendale Community Council. Thank you.
All right, let's give them a round of applause. All right. Sorry about the misspell on the Wasatch Front Regional Council. We try to make that change, but perhaps that didn't come through. All right. Any questions from the audience on the Zoom? Angelo?
I have a question. I was thinking of it. I didn't have, I just was popping in case I could think of one, but I didn't have one handy right now, so I was just thinking. So.
Let me stop sharing.
I have a question.
Yes,
I
hold
know-
on. Let me yes, please go ahead.
Oh, my video is not working. I had a question because it was alluded to briefly in the beginning, and I know that you're using both qualitative and quantitative evidence to kind of help with your findings. But now that you've seen that there's really no statistically significant difference in outcome based on the speed limit change, I'm curious as to the students' opinions on what could actually help contribute. I know Ryan mentioned road geometry.
All right. Anyone wants to answer that question? Come up here.
Sorry, we're kind of a big group, so trying to coordinate. Yeah, so we definitely talked about how it's pretty evident given these results that without actual design changes and traffic calming measures and those sorts of interventions, that the policy is at least preliminarily, given like where we are in the stage of analysis, pretty inconclusive as to if it actually makes a positive, like if it makes a difference. And so we definitely feel even more, I feel like many of us in this group already felt pretty strongly about like implementing design changes in addition to changing the speed limit. But I would say throughout this entire process that this kind of further, at least for me, like further like ingrained that opinion that like, yeah, we need to implement traffic calming and various design changes to actually force drivers to go slower on many of these routes, especially like designated neighborhood byway routes where the city is encouraging cyclists to use and is communicating to cyclists that this is a safer route.
Thanks. Yeah, after listening to the data, I kind of feel similarly.
Yeah, I mean, given that it's only been implemented for for 2 years, and it was just kind of coming out of the COVID, so I guess awareness is also an issue. So it's gonna take time for people to recognize that speed limit change. So I think that there's a long way to go.
Yeah, I have a comment, Andy, just as we've been looking at speed limit changes at UDOT, we understand what you guys just basically said is you can't just change the speed limit and people are gonna adapt and change it, okay? And so, in Wasatch Front, developed, I'll call it context classifications. I can't remember their terminology, but for UDOT, we realized that we gotta change the infrastructure to not only at the places where you're trying to reduce speed, but coming in and out of those as well in transition phases. So that's what we're trying to do with our speed limit reduction efforts. And so it's really trying to attack it holistically with classifying it as an area that has a lot of pedestrians and people with disabilities, walkers, bikers, whatever, and then trying to change that infrastructure along with speed limit changes.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's step in the right direction. Change the law gives sort of, provide a framework. But we all agree that there needs to be more work to be done to actually make this effective. So, and that's what we're finding in our research as well. All right, any other questions, comments? Stephanie, Steve?
Yeah, I'd just say, yeah, from the Salt Lake City perspective, this is something that we sort of guessed would happen, but not that policy change is easy, but we were able to get the speed limit change through knowing that we would have to follow it up with the infrastructure, which takes a little more time to get in place. And so hopefully in the coming years, it'd be interesting to look at this project again once we get some of the livable streets projects done and see what actually happens when you change the infrastructure along with the speed limit. So looking forward to updates in a couple years.
Yeah, other projects.
Yeah, so yeah, we got a lot in the pipeline, a lot coming. But yeah, infrastructure takes time and money, and so we're doing what we can.
Yeah, completely agree. Steve, you have any comments?
My only comment would be I really enjoyed the presentation and the data that came out of it. Didn't even know Salt Lake was thinking about reducing speed limit from 25 to 20, but I'm glad to see that the data that comes out that my city doesn't really need to do that because it's 25 is still pretty good. I like the fact that the recommendations of traffic calming devices and things to come out are probably more preferred and or easier to do. My only critique would be is on the presentation, just they need to, a lot of us have those little quirks of and stuff. So when you're doing presentation, like in front of a planning commission or a city council, present more of than I'm doing it here now as I critiqued it, but present more confidence in what they're doing. It always helps with the presentation of the council to see the confidence in what they're doing and that they believe in what's going on. But overall, really good.
Yeah, thank you for your constructive comments. It looks like we need to have another class on communication. Okay, Jessica, you had another question?
I have one more comment in case the right person is listening and something can be changed. But although my neighborhood street has already been changed to 20 miles per hour, my in-car GPS for the map is still at 25 miles per hour when it's reading like what the speed limit should be. So getting those the technology to align and be accurate with what's actually being implemented. It's already been changed for 2 years now, so that would be nice.
Yeah, I don't know how that the Google incorporates all that speed limit change. Maybe we need to lobby Google to really make that changes.
I have no idea.
Yeah, but yeah, I think overall we're, you know, it's a step in the right direction. As I said, it's providing all the framework, legal framework is quite important. But the lessons learned we hear is we need to do more. We can't just be satisfied with the speed limit change. So, all right. So then that wraps up our presentation. Again, please give a round of applause to our students who completed this work. And as we are wrapping up our project, we're going to make this available on YouTube and the preliminary, the findings in the report in the forthcoming weeks. All right. Thanks for joining us today. See ya.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.